To government's data, by which I mean numerical data, information that's counted or measured, is the lifeblood of government departments. They use it to shape policy, to make decisions, and to keep track of how things are going. We might hear that crime has gone up by 14%, or that unemployment has gone down by 2 percentage points, or that 400,000 people have moved in or out of poverty. Numbers give credibility, they ground us, they reveal something like the objective truth, or so we think. Despite the best intentions, governments and politicians keep running into difficulties because they make decisions based on flawed or inaccurate data. Behind the solid numbers, there lies a world of human decision-making. And what I've realized is numbers don't count themselves. That might sound obvious. And some things are inherently hard to count, impossible even. And I'm not talking so much here about the manipulation of statistics, political spin, fake news, and things like that. I'm talking actually about mainly government-produced official statistics, which we and politicians should be able to trust. And this has led me to think about a wider problem that I'm calling bad data. When doing the research for this book, I was most shocked by cases where there's no data at all. The government didn't actually know how many people owned land or who they were. It's estimated still that about 15% of the land in England is unregistered, meaning we don't actually have a complete central picture of who owns what. We don't know how many children in this country are homeschooled because there's no requirement for that data to be collected anywhere, and there's no central register of them. And yet it's an important policy area. We didn't know until the pandemic how many people worked in social care, in care homes, until that became something that they needed to collect data on. We don't know very much actually about the prison population. We don't know how many have dependent children, including women who are in prison. And although we have data on various things about the population, much of it is not disaggregated in ways that would be useful, so by sex or gender or ethnicity. But not everything can be counted or measured in such a straightforward way. There are some things which are very important in public policy, but which are hard to count because they don't have a fixed definition. Take poverty. People who've experienced poverty will tell you they can describe exactly what it's like. And we're all familiar with the more overt signs of poverty, like people living in homelessness and starvation. But poverty doesn't have a fixed definition. It doesn't have a concrete set of signs that are universally agreed upon, or an obvious cutoff point between poor and not poor. Nowadays, we think of poverty as something multidimensional. And there are other things which are hard to define but important for policy. Inequality, loneliness, antisocial behavior, mental illness, even having a disability. So there's no obvious cutoff point necessarily between being disabled and not. It's a matter of human decision-making. And the way that we define these things can also influence how we solve them. So including housing conditions in your definition of poverty means making housing conditions part of the solution. New Labour brought in a policy shift where they started to see statistics as the cornerstone of the democratic process. And a flagship policy was the Freedom of Information Act. This was what Tony Blair said about himself. "You idiot, you naive, foolish, irresponsible nincompoop. There really is no description of stupidity, no matter how vivid, that is adequate. I quake at the imbecility of it." The policy decision he was describing there was introducing the Freedom of Information Act. It was one of his biggest regrets. And why? Because after years of having the curtains closed during the previous government, he hadn't just opened them to let people peep in. He'd given the house key to all the neighbours. At least that's how he saw it. And this Freedom of Information Act, it meant that, and it's still going today, anybody, members of the public, can ask the government for information, and often that will be statistics. And it's unearthed a lot of things. So MPs' expenses were first revealed under this Freedom of Information Act. It was found that MPs were claiming for lots of things which they shouldn't have been claiming for, and there were even criminal convictions. MPs were sent to prison because of that. And now we have a system where MPs' expenses are independently monitored, and that was because of this act. We know from FOI what land is owned by offshore companies, so helping to fill in some of the gaps in the holy map that we have of land registration. And it was under FOI that we first got data on ambulance response times, which now you would think that's a really important thing to have information on. And now it is published regularly by the NHS. And there is acknowledgement from government about the ethical issues around data. They've got data ethics frameworks. They've got frameworks for the governance of artificial intelligence, which is a really good step. And there are campaigns out there outside of government like Algorithm Watch and the Open Algorithms Network, civil liberties campaigns like Liberty and Big Brother Watch. And you've got campaign groups like Who Owns England, which is trying to fill in some of those gaps in the map as to land registration. Governments and politicians want to make decisions based on hard evidence, and that's a good thing. The best thing would be to acknowledge the uncertainty around statistics. If we locate the human elements in the numbers, we recognize that numbers are not the solid, neutral, objective monoliths that we sometimes think they are. And then we can figure out where to set our expectations.